Okay, so Community Partnership of the Ozarks, we are home based out in Springfield, Missouri. Our mission is to, and I have to read this, don't tell my boss, to facilitate and promote the building of resilient children, healthy families, and strong neighborhoods and communities through collaboration, programming, and resource development. So we serve about 29 counties, I believe, in Southwest Missouri. Our program, we're made up of four main divisions, which are early childhood, homelessness and affordable housing, prevention and youth support, and community and neighborhood development. So I like to used to say that we did everything here at CPO except for spay and neuter cats and dogs. And then last month we got a grant for that. So, so now we're also providing veterinary services. So we do a lot. We're a boots on the ground organization. We have one of the biggest budgets in the state of Missouri as far as nonprofits go. So we have a really wide reach. We've been around for almost 30 years at this point, and so the name recognition is also really helpful. So my specific position is I'm the director of community collaboratives. Doug has a list of our collaboratives on there. So our collaboratives are groups of community stakeholders, government leaders, people who have a vested interest in addressing something. And those groups meet once a month. We have a pretty strict 60-minute, we show up, we meet for an hour, and then we leave. We're not there to keep anyone all day, and that really helps a lot. The groups are a really nice mix of for-profit and nonprofit entities. We've also got some educational representation like Missouri State. And we are always looking to diversify. And when I say diversify, I don't just mean race and gender. I'm also talking about sector, right? So you might not think about how closely some of these things tie in together. We're thinking about maybe a major manufacturer in your county or in your city, and they probably have a pretty vested interest in transportation or housing, because if they can't house people, then they don't have people to employ. If their employees don't have adequate transportation, whether that's public transportation or affordable vehicles, then they don't have anyone to hire. And so that's one of the biggest things about our collaborative, is that we are working to represent everyone who needs representation. Ideally, our collaboratives fold. Hopefully they go away. Hopefully we solve that issue. One of the best examples is like 10 or 12 years ago, there was a big influx of homeless youth in our community. That was a really big struggle. A group of stakeholders came together, formed a collaborative, and a homeless youth drop-in center was formed called Rare Breed. And now that collaborative is no more because it's not in our wheelhouse to run something, but the collaboratives are a place to come for ideas and brainstorming and all of those things that make the bigger stuff possible. Doug, what did I miss?
I think you covered a lot. Did you talk about how the territory you guys cover, the counties?
Yeah, like 29 counties in Southwest Missouri.
Yeah.
I think it's 29. Anyone can join the collaboratives. Really, the collaboratives are mostly focused on the local tri-county area, like Greene, Christian, Webster. And part of that is just because of meeting, right? It's hard to come to a meeting 16 counties away. So really, the collaboratives tend to be sort of hyper-focused in our Springfield metro area.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Ashley. And I think it's interesting that the territory that CPO covers is so large, and besides the Springfield, the metropolitan area, has so many of these rural areas, and even out as you get down to Joplin, an example of that, the environmental collaborative. Actually, another thing that they created is, I think 10 years ago now, we formed the Ozarks Clean Air Alliance as a subcommittee of the environmental collaborative, because of the need to address air quality, ground level ozone and PM in the region. And when we did that, we went out to all these different counties through CPO and talked to them about what they're doing impacts what happens in Springfield and these things. So, and as a result of that, actually what happened was Joplin created their own air quality group using our Ozarks Clean Air Alliance as a model. And their group covers not only Joplin, but obviously parts of Kansas and Oklahoma, because of the air quality that is transient and comes into the Joplin area. So they ended up being a multi-state kind of little network. So it's great to see these groups, even though we may not all join meetings together, but we're actually creating groups in different regions, all part of what CPO has started. So it's a great organization. So as you see all these different collaboratives that we have, and they all do great things. And about a year ago, about a year and a half ago, we started a discussion with Community Partnership of the Ozarks and some of our environmental collaborative members to see how do we actually take the collaboratives and get them to work together towards common goals, and looking at it in terms of how do we get the greater Springfield area to look at sustainable community development. So in that, we're looking at it in terms of setting annual goals community can work towards to achieve to keep moving forward. In Springfield, we have a program called the Community Focus Report. And it actually I think it's 3 years, 2 years. I keep getting that confused, even though I helped create that, help contribute to that. So every 2 years, we do a report that highlights what we call red flags and blue ribbons. And it covers things from environmental to health, health and wellness, to homelessness, housing, all these different things, poverty issues. And we come up with red flags and then blue ribbons. In terms of blue ribbons, these are things that we have accomplished, but red flags are things we need to work on. And what we noticed in the greater Springfield community was that these red flags were the same every 2 years. We were not making as much progress on these as we had hoped. And so we wanted to come up with a way to be more proactive in addressing those, but also look at moving the community more into sustainable community development. So we started talking about how do we do that? And at MSU, we had embraced the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and became a member of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network. So we were already looking at those from what we're doing, incorporating that into our academics programs and our sustainability programs on campus. So we thought, well, that could be a really good model to look at. So we benchmarked other cities across the United States that have started to implement the SDGs and how they were doing it. And a lot of them were doing it as part of the government project. The city was saying, we're going to adopt this. We wanted to look at it, make it really a grassroots effort to where it wasn't run by the city, because sometimes that's where things go to die. We wanted to actually make sure it was a really grassroots thing that was going to get involvement from the people who are actually doing the projects that make a difference. So we partnered with CPO because they have this network, 29 counties. They already have the collaboratives. They already have a mechanism of meeting regular. Some collaboratives were already setting goals and what they wanted to achieve. They set mission statements. And because of the collaboratives really covered the spectrum of sustainability, when you look at it, not just from the environmental, but the social and the economic, it was perfect. So Ashley and her predecessor and her whole leadership really embraced it and really got on board with the project. So we actually received a small grant from Missouri Department of Conservation last year to fund a GA to help do this. So this last year, we started in and looking at how do we do this. We actually used the Sustainable Development Goals as a model. We worked with all 6 collaboratives. We did some training with them on what the SDGs were. We did a lot of review with them on what their current missions were and what their current goals were. And one thing we found is only a few of the collaboratives really had measurable performance-based goals. And that was something that we really wanted to establish, because we want something that we can measure year after year. So we want goals instead of the red flags that are out there and every 2 years of the same things, we wanted goals that we could say, these are the results this year. And then we set a new goal for next year. And part of this is to create a website to track this, to get more community members involved, engaged with some of these goals. So we worked with the collaboratives, did a lot of training and education with them. We actually ended up creating a subcommittee with representatives from each of the collaboratives to help us kind of really steer us to making sure we were working in line with what the collaboratives were doing, because we didn't want to change what they were doing. We wanted to kind of break down some silos. The collaboratives are doing great things, but we tend to do them in silos. And even from the environmental collaborative, we were very good at that. We really weren't, even though things that we were doing should be related to housing, should be related to transportation, should be related to food, but we really weren't talking about it in that regard. So our mission and our metrics, our goals weren't really relevant. So we changed that. And we're still working on changing that. So we wanted to make sure we had a way to bring them all together, to work together, to see that even though they're working on things individually in their goals within their own collaboratives, they overlap. What the food is doing has an impact in housing and has an impact in environmental and transportation and all these different things. So we spent pretty much a big part of the year doing that awareness education. We developed some materials in terms of showing how each of the collaborative's missions overlap with the sustainable development goals, and they overlap with the community red flags. And really that was a purpose to kind of break down those silos, to show that all these things are related. We need to be focusing on how do we leverage the resources that we have through the collaboratives, our manpower and local grants to address these things. We do have local funding, but because we work in silos, we're all good about competing with each other for that funding rather than trying to work together to solve it, to leverage that resource to have better results. So that was one thing we really addressed. And one of the things that the group recommended was doing a workshop. And this was really a great project. We actually invited representatives from each of the collaboratives to attend, and we had over 40 representatives from each collaborative. And we had one of our faculty from Missouri State University, who oversees our sustainability academic program, facilitate it. And it was an outstanding workshop where we brought collaborators. We first had them sit in their own tables and talk about, okay, here's your mission. Here are the sustainable development goals. Which goals do you think works well with your collaborative? And so they went through a process of doing that. It started with, I think, two or three. We narrowed it down to one. And then we said, okay, now everybody change, and there needs to be one representative from each collaborative at each table. So we had a mixture. And that was, again, to kind of work in breaking down the silos. And then we had them go through that same process again. And that was the most interesting discussion, because they were talking about, well, in our collaborative, we identified SDG goal number 8. Well, we identified in our collaborative, we divided 9. And they started talking about, well, these things are interrelated. And so they started talking more about what they're doing. And then they came up with goals, a common goal that would be for their table. And so that was a really great exercise to get them thinking outside the box, outside of their collaboratives, and seeing what they do impacts others and how others impact their collaborative. And then we had them go through another voting process, and we narrowed it down to one collaborative or one goal for this year and one goal for next year. So that was a very good exercise to get the collaboratives to work together and to see how they can help each other improve. And then after that, we had a really cool experience that we're still working on. Is once we did this workshop, it was just a couple weeks afterwards that a new program called Network for Progress showed up, or created in Springfield, and it was designed to address the red flags specifically. And we were already incorporating the red flags into ours. But it's a group that's from the local foundations that started this. And they were pretty much doing exactly what we were doing, but somewhat on a smaller scale, because we had all of the collaboratives and they were just trying to create this. They were trying to create this network. So it posed a really cool opportunity for us to say, okay, how do we work with them so that we can actually leverage more resources and not duplicate things in the community? Because we're great about doing that in communities. When an organization creates something and someone else will create something very similar, and we didn't want people in the community to see where we're doing the same thing. We're being asked to do the same thing with these two groups. So Ashley and I have just started the process of meeting with them to talk about how do we merge these programs. And so far, the response has been very positive. We have a meeting tomorrow to talk about that more. But we're actually going after another grant this year, another Missouri Department of Conservation grant to continue this project over the next year, because we now know we need to merge it with this network of progress, but we also wanted to set more specific goals and work with the collaboratives more. In their annual goal setting process, one of our outcomes from our workshop was to say, okay, here's our overall goal that we want to address as a community. Now, how do we set targets and goals within each collaborative that actually address that? So the environmental collaborative will work at setting a goal that addresses that common one. The food collaborative will do the same thing, and each of them will. So that helps us start driving that networking and leveraging those resources. And one of the big things that came out too is when we think about environmental justice, and the environmental collaborative is starting to address this, looking at the EJ screening tool and how do we look at this for the greater community. Even though when we look at sustainability, we're inherently addressing environmental justice if we're doing it right. We're addressing environmental, social, and economic. But we wanted to have a component in there that really highlighted it and made it a core educational component, and possibly additional criteria in terms of how we're setting our annual goals. So this is a next step that we're going to be starting this summer, really focusing on environmental justice. It's going to be really start through the lens of the environmental collaborative and then expand out to the food collaborative and the transportation and others. So that's kind of where we're at. I want to let Ashley add anything that I might have missed since I talked a lot.
No, you're totally good. I think that just, really the most important takeaway here is that we found or are in the process of finding a way to work closely, with other groups, and to not reinvent the wheel, right? And we have all of this volunteer fatigue, when it comes to nonprofits. And when we look at our collaboratives, we see some of the same people from the same organizations and different groups. And it's important to us to not ask people to come to meeting after meeting after meeting. And so that's one of the big things that we're looking at with combining with this new movement.
And that's a really big part of it, is bringing more people into the collaboratives that haven't been before. As actually a lot of these collaboratives have been around. The environmental collaborative is a good example. It's the same group, mostly nonprofits. I think it's all nonprofits or government entities. And historically, it was where we come and we just talk about, here's what we're doing. And what we recognize is we needed to say, okay, it's great what we're doing. How do we set a goal that we can work together to see some results for the community?
Yep.
And so that's the direction that we're going in, and pushing the other collaboratives to do the same thing. But even in our environmental collaborative, we recognize we don't have private industry in there. We don't have manufacturing. We don't have other institutions that need to be part of it. So we've actually opened it up this year. We have one manufacturer that's joined. We have Bass Pro, Cabela's that's joined. Their sustainability staff is going to be part of it. So that's manufacturing and retail and hospitality. So we're opening up to bring more of these private entities into, so that when we look at things like environmental justice and we look at things like pollution prevention we have that, those people there as part of teams to understand what these are, how they can apply those within their own organizations and institutions. So it's a really fun time. It's our goal is to kind of see, how do we develop this in Springfield? And really it is a model. And the intent is that if we can do it well and we can have really measurable results, it could be a really good model for other communities to work at. So
I think one thing I had forgotten about when we're talking about working or trying to gain the public's trust, right? Or your community's trust or your community's buy-in. One really good place to do that, aside from community groups, specifically like these, like stakeholder groups, is neighborhood association meetings. If y'all are members of your neighborhood association, then going to those meetings, the people there already know you. They probably, hopefully they trust you. And that gives you the opportunity to bring some of these things down to their level where maybe they wouldn't have had an opportunity to hear about it beforehand. And so you can get that buy-in at that really granular level through neighborhood association meetings.
Yep. So with that, we'll take any questions. I see Jim's got a question.
There we go. Got myself unmuted. Yeah, Ashley, very simply, I'm with EPA Region 7 out of the Kansas City area, but Missouri is one of our 4 states that we serve. We have some other programs besides our pollution prevention program that may have connections with your collaboratives. For example, we are doing, through a cooperative agreement with one of our grantees, a food summit for the Southwest Missouri area, generally Springfield, Joplin, Branson, etc., later this month. And want to make sure that we can get an invite to that summit so that it gets out to your food collaborative or others that might be interested.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I know we've also done work in our lead-based paint program, which would tie in nicely, I think, with your housing group. If they don't have information about the dangers of older stock housing and potential for lead-based paint. And our pesticide program, I know, has also done some work down in that area. And again, just trying to make those linkages of, we could provide information or, talk to folks and, you're kind of right. Make sure we're all working together and not duplicating efforts.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was gonna say, I'll throw my email address in the chat. And if you have some of those invitations or upcoming events that you want people around here to know about, you can just send them to me and I'll pass them out.
That would be great. Thanks, Ashley.
Yeah, Jim, especially on the lead-based paint, that's definitely something that we're probably going to be addressing in the environmental collaborative, because it's a good one that environmental and the housing collaborative could work together on. So if there's any resources where, any of your staff or something would be willing to come down and talk to the groups or collaboratives, I think that would be great too. So,
and I know they just recently translated some of the material into Spanish. I'm not sure which dialect, but it was one appropriate for the area.
Cool.
Great. Anyone else have any questions? None?
Well, thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
You have a website, Ashley, you could put in the chat too, or I guess it was on the first slide.
No problem.
Yep.
Or one of the earlier slides. There it is. Okay.
Yep.
Community partnership with the Ozarks. cpozarks.org. Okay. Thank you.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you, Ashley, very much for taking time this morning.